one of the ideas was precipitated by a paper that a very bright medical student presented, and it was looking at burnout and even PTSD in house staff, and it was surprisingly high. I said, how can that be? You know, they have 8-hour work weeks. You know, we can't shame and blame them anymore. It shouldn't be like that. And then I realized, well, it's really much harder to have a balanced life than the unbalanced life that we lived when we were residents. All we did was stay in the hospital all the time, and when we went home, we were asleep. And we didn't have to go to our children's pediatrician appointments or to our great aunt's funeral. We just worked all the time. But there are some old-timers here who do have a balanced life, and they were able to find a life outside the hospital. So I wanted to give them a chance to tell us what it's like. And the format today is we're going to have each speaker come and speak for less than a quarter of an hour. I'm going to step down and sit in the audience and let them just come up in order. The first one will be Alan Herline, and Alan is professor at Medical College of Georgia, now Augusta University, where he was a graduate from. He went to Vanderbilt, and then it took him a while to get, to get and finish his medical training, because he had a few years as a NFL punter, booming 50-yard punts. Our next speaker then will be Philip Burns, who needs no introduction. He's a former executive director of this group and a Distinguished Service Award winner. And he's going to tell us what it's like to be a cattle baron. David Richardson, another one of our leaders, editor of our journal, Distinguished Service Award winner, is going to tell us what it's like to race thoroughbred horses. And then finally, Joe Tipas, who has as much credit for leading me into academic surgery as he did 3/4 of my graduating class at the Naval Hospital in Portsmouth. So I'm indebted to Joe for a long time. He's going to tell us what it's like to face the hospital and face death from the other side. So, David, will you kick us off? Or Alan, will you start us off? Kick us off, right?
Right. Kick us off. Yeah. We're punting already.
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank the Southeastern Surgical for the opportunity to be here, and I want to thank David for his kind invitation. I also appreciate the fact that he's allowed me to be the youngest of the group up here, but the least distinguished, and so that also fits well with being a punter in the NFL. There's kind of a subtitle. There's a subtitle to the talk, which is, "Can being an NFL punter change how you care for patients?" And so with that, I will launch. Started really humbly. I was a walk-on at Vanderbilt. I did not get a scholarship coming out of high school. Still, I had this idea in my mind that I could actually compete at a very high level academically and athletically. I ended up being right on one of them and wrong on the other, and the right was the athletic, the wrong was actually the academic, but that's a whole separate story. Just to give you an idea, 1.6% of NCAA football players make any kind of splash at all in the NFL. So that ends up being about 0.01% of high school players, and then it's a very long shot that you're looking at. Not all goes well for everybody that plays, and just to give you an idea, since the goal here was to give you kind of what it's like trying to be in a sport and certainly be in a position like punting or kicking, you don't remember much of what you do well because that doesn't necessarily drive you to do better. What you remember is what doesn't go well. So in '85, we played Georgia. We tied. I missed a field goal, 44 yards just off the left hash, pushed it about 8 inches right. We were tied 13-13, would have won the game as the clock ran out. I can tell you everything about that scenario, the 2 or 3 minutes surrounding that play. I had to go back and look to see that I averaged 48 yards a punt that game, had 2 balls that were inside the 5-yard line. I made 2 field goals, one in the third quarter, or one in the fourth quarter rather, from 47 yards that tied the game. Those things I had to recall by looking, otherwise you just remember the mistakes. So I walked off the podium at graduation and literally drove to the airport and got on a plane to go to minicamp at New England. There performed well enough to have an opportunity to come back and get a letter in the mail that says, here's your NFL contract. While I was there, I met a man named Dean Brittenham. Dean used to, Coach Britton used to do a lot of track coaching, and he was one of the first people that, for sprinters, you may or may not know, sprinters are an inherent talent, meaning you either have the fast twitch muscles or you don't. But what you work on is how quick you get out of the blocks and how long your stride is. So it's pretty simple math. You know, you take this many steps a second, and if your steps take up more length, then you move faster than the next person. So he started a training method where he would have them run downhill so they got used to taking longer strides. When I got there, he said, Alan, the first thing I got to tell you, for you to come back and actually compete for this job, you're going to have to improve, and I think you have the ability to improve. First thing is, he goes, once a week, you're going to need somebody to measure your hang times. Don't need to worry about distance, don't need to worry about those things, you need to worry about hang times because it's a physics problem. If the ball's in the air 4.5 to 5 seconds, it will go far enough that your distance is not an issue. He goes, and then the second thing is I really solidly believe that you need to look very critically at those times each week and decide where you need to work. Is it that you're having too many bad punts? Is you don't have enough great punts? And you will change your technique accordingly. He goes, the next thing I want you to do, and I've not ever been able to get one of our punters here to try and do this, is I want you to find a physical object that you can punt the ball over. He goes, because I believe your body will make the subtle adjustments to punt better by doing that over and over. So when you practice, every time you need to have a target and a goal. And his goal that he had wanted to do for some time there in New England was stretch a banner at the top of the lights in the stadium and use that as a object that the punters would punt towards every single time. You get a certain distance away, about 30 yards. Your punt is typically an ellipse, and if you're getting the ball up over that, your hang time will increase, your distance will be fine, and they'll do better. So I was open to coaching, so this is actually raw stats from that I would record, and each week, sometimes less, sometimes a little more, through that summer before I reported back to camp, I would measure. And then what do? You analyze your data. You look through it. So these are actual data from then, taking to heart what he said and trying to figure it out. Now, thanks to Andrew Mitchell, one of our residents, he actually helped me with the stats, putting the graphs together, so I appreciate it very much for his help. So this is how it looked very much like a bell curve. Good is a 4 to 4.25 second hang time. Great is, good is 4 to 4.5. Great is 4.5 to 4.75, and excellent is above 4.75 seconds. For those of y'all in the audience that may not know, the reason that's important is if you think about a typical person from start running a 40-yard dash in about 4.3, 4.4 seconds, then that's how much time it takes your coverage people to get downfield. So if your hang times are not those kind of times, then the return team has more opportunity to return the ball. It's much more of a science than anybody ever realized. So the next challenge was, what object am I going to punt over? So first I went to our practice fields. The lights on the practice field were too low. I could easily punt over those as it was right then. So then I went to the stadium. The problem with the stadium lights was if you were inside the stadium, the lights sat about 50 yards from where you would punt, so it was too far away. And so then I moved over to the baseball field. And standing on the infield of the baseball field, I looked up and saw how high those lights were, and I thought, this is ridiculous. I will never be able to punt a ball over those lights. And so but that wasn't the point. The point was to have a target each time. So I walked back about 30, 35 yards from where the base of the lights were and began to punt. And so that's where I would practice every day, and then go on to the field once a week to do the measurements. What happened over the summer was really drastic and was really quite fascinating. I'll present it now to you in data format. So that's what it looks like if you look at just the averages. And so this is where analytics becomes important. So I want you to now start thinking about, how do we take care of our patients? We constantly look at our data, we look at how our outcomes are, and then we look at metrics that we can do to change how those patients do. Sometimes, though, our analytics, if we just look at averages, it doesn't tell the whole story. So you see quite an increase from in May when I started doing this, but then it seems to flatline. So let's break it down a little more. So the first time we tested, here's how it broke down. That looks a little bit different than the initial bell curve that I showed you. And then notice how the bell curve is starting to shift. The proportion of great and excellent punts the first time that I measured when I went back home from minicamp was 26.8%. The last time before I went back to camp, it was 72.5%. That means 3/4 of the time I'm punting a ball that's more than 4.5 seconds in the air. Just to give you an idea, the average NFL hang time this past season was approximately 4.45 seconds. So I was going back into camp 3/4 of the time I'm punting greater than 4.5 second hang times. So that makes you a very viable punter at that point. I think we have to look at our improvement in how we care for patients in that same way. We have to find a way to measure it. We have to completely go back to it and continue to review it. All righty. So then you go to camp. Camp starts. Camp is a grind. It's less of a grind now. Listen to me as a punter saying that. But it's a grind, meaning what you first realize when you get to camp is everything you do is measured. I remember one day what we would do is we'd go out, warm up, the special teams folks come out, and now we're punting for just our return people. You think, I'm just punting for return guys. I'm walking from one section of practice to head over to another. One of the assistant coaches grabs me and goes, hey, you're hitting the ball really well today. You had a couple of 4.8, 4.9 second hang times. There was a clock always on you. Everything you did was being watched, and at first that makes you really nervous, and then you really grasp it, and you just say, man, I'm living very transparently out here. They watch everything I do. I'm sure for a lot of us, that's how it feels in the hospital. Every single thing we do is watched. So instead of resisting it, we just need to grasp it, need to understand it. So started off, if you look over here, being third string on the depth chart, that was the initial depth chart that came out for punting, is not a good thing, especially when an incumbent is a punter, especially when the first string guy is an incumbent. Then on the kickoff team, this is how it progresses. So now you see I'm second string. You see there's no other punters listed there besides myself and Rich Camarillo, really nice guy. Finished his career top 10 in NFL averages, and that's me right behind him, right there. Then down here, this was a big moment, was the kickoff team. I moved from being third string on that up to second string on that. And so you start finding ways to put yourself in position to make progress. Then there's all the other things that go on in camp. You have to sing at dinner. You don't have a choice about that if you're a rookie. And yes, you can sing. I walked across Kansas in a New York minute and pull that David Allen Coe song out and just throw that out there and it'll fly. But not singing won't fly. The lights really came on for me the first punting meeting I went to. So Dante Scarnecchia, who those of you who may or may not know is probably one of the more well-known assistant coaches in the NFL, is the offensive line coach for the New England Patriots. So think about that. He was the special teams coach when I was there. He probably has the longest tenure of assistant coach anywhere in the NFL. It's not even close. And when I tell you this, you'll see why. I walked into what is NFL special teams meetings going to be like. Man, he went over the theory, why we rush inside out, why we cover outside in. I mean, he covered all of it. For the punters, it wasn't just, hey, we need you to kick the ball well. For the punters, it was you have between 1.85 to 2.0 seconds from the time the ball snapped to get it off. If it is longer than 2 seconds, you will get it blocked. If it's less than 1.85, we can't cover that ball downfield because we don't have time. Your job is to be between 1.85 and 2.0 seconds. Every ball you punted was measured. Every time you kicked was measured. We had certain calls. Blue meant that ball had to be outside the numbers, but outside the numbers by 2 yards. If you punt it too far out, then we don't have a chance to hit the guy and make a big play, cause a fumble. If it's inside of that, now he has a lane to run in. Very exact. Always exact. Always, this is how you need to be, how your hands were, how you stood, how the ball was snapped. All of it was very precise. Then game time. I was very fortunate during the first preseason games, played there the whole preseason, averaged 46 yards a punt. That was enough to cause a lot of stir because they had an incumbent punter already who was doing very well. Now all of a sudden you have this rookie here that's also doing well, and now you're starting to ask, man, do we need to make a switch? At least in my head, I'm thinking that. So everything's good. So the NFL was all good and all fun until the Turk shows up. Those of y'all who may not know, the Turk is the person assigned to tell people that they are cut. So I had 4 roommates while I was in camp that were cut. So every morning at 6 o'clock up and down the hall after the first week of camp, you hear this. Mr. Smith, can you bring your playbook and report to Dick Steinberg before breakfast? That means you're done. So 4 times I'm laying in bed and you're thinking, oh, God, I hope that's not me. And then your day starts and you got to get going. I mean, just, you're back out on the field and go from there. So article comes out talking about how Rich Camarillo's job's in trouble. Up till then, it had been very fun in the special teams meeting room, very much a partnership. And from that day forward, it was not. It was very much his job's on the line and my job's on the line. This is a termination letter. Everybody that plays in the NFL, almost without exception, gets one of these. And it basically says, in the judgment of the club, your performance doesn't meet the standard. So many times I think we're faced with that same thing within our hospitals today. We're told your performance doesn't meet the standard. And I think we need to start learning how to say, let me look at the metrics that got me to that point, as opposed to just responding defensively, whether it's surgical site infections, whatever it is, length of stay, all these components that we get pushed on. So then the strike occurs. So strike occurs, I'm released from New England. Dick Steinberg calls me, we'd like to have you punt during the strike. Absolutely, glad to come back and do it. I hang up the phone, literally I hang up the phone and the Cardinals call and say, we want you to come here, we just cut our punter. So strike occurs, we've cut our punter, we want to sign you. And in my young head, I thought that I couldn't call Dick Steinberg back and say, Dick, I can't come because I have a job in Arizona, or they were between Memphis, St. Louis, and Arizona at that time, but I have a job there, and that's what I should have done. Who knows whether it would have played differently or not. But I went back up to New England, and I want you to look right there. That's the ball right there, and that's me punting. That's not a good thing, by the way, for those of you in the audience who don't know. So I get out on the field. First punt that I do, that I participate in, is blocked. Come over to the sidelines. First thing I want to know is what? I want to know the stopwatch. Alan, is a 185. You're fine. Dang. Get back out on the next one. Next punt is blocked. Come back over the sidelines. Alan, that's a 175. Third time, blocked again. I come back to the sidelines. It's a 1-6. It's really hard to punt a ball much faster than that, I'll just tell you. So I go back out for the fourth punt. We're up by 2 points. We're punting from the 36 coming out of our end zone. And Dante Scarnecchia grabs me. And he says words I'll never forget. Clearly, you haven't figured it out. You have no effing protection. Get the damn ball punted off. I think I got it off in like 1.1 seconds, and we ended up winning the game, 47-yard punt and all those kind of good things. I went from there to Tampa Bay, and the only reason I'll go over the Tampa Bay piece is to draw a distinction between the very exact science and the way that they approach business in New England and when I arrived in Tampa Bay. When I arrived in Tampa Bay, I go to my first special teams meeting. Man, I'm ready to contribute. I've got a lot of knowledge. And the coach walks in and goes, gentlemen, there's two things you need to know about punting, high and far. And then he repeats it as if that was complex, high and far. Bill Smith, who went to Ole Miss and holds the NCAA record for most 50-yard punts in a row, raises his hand and goes, Coach, if we have to choose between high and far, how do we choose? This is the honest truth. And the coach then lights up and goes, that's the kind of thinking, gentlemen, I want going on. At that point, I realized that maybe I had been on the exact right team for me, and maybe I was no longer on the right team. So in conclusion, being an NFL punter can change how you care for patients. It can change how you think about process improvement. Set metrics and goals for improvement in all that you do, and be specific in how you achieve those goals, and then make it part of the process. I, really appreciate you taking time to listen to me share a little bit about my story. Thank you.